The first game in the franchise was simply titled The Legend of Zelda in the West, whereas in Japan it was known as the Hyrule Fantasy, Zelda no Densetsu, which surprisingly enough means Legend of Zelda. If we look at the Japanese prologue screen, which oddly used English text, we can see there is no the before legend. This is because Japanese does not use articles such as ah or the. Though merely a fact of Japanese linguistics, in retrospect this missing definite article in the earliest release of the series is fitting. There are now, of course, many Legends of Zelda. So why Zelda? It's well documented that the princess is named after US orphan socialite Zelda Fitzgerald, because she was supposedly renowned for her beauty. But what specifically drew franchise creator Shigeru Miyamoto to the name Zelda, as opposed to the name of another historical beauty like Helen, Lola, or Audrey? Well, according to the preface he wrote for the Zelda lorebook Hyrule Historia, it was a planner in charge of the game's PR that originally suggested the name. This planner wanted to release a storybook to promote the game, and thought its princess should possess timeless beauty. So, having heard of F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife and her renowned looks, he put forward Zelda. Maybe it was simply the name's sound, or perhaps the peculiarity lent to it by being foreign and beginning with Z. Whatever the case, Miyamoto became enamoured with it. The plan had always been to call the game The Legend of Something or Someone, and now he was sure who that someone was. The storybook idea was shelved. Gaming's second most famous princess was born. But how did the name Zelda originate? Well, there are two roots it may have emerged from. One is potentially Yiddish, as a female form of Selig or Zelig, which themselves are derived from a Hebrew name meaning happy or, more fittingly, blessed. Since, while many iterations of the princess have lived through unhappy circumstances, in lore they are undoubtedly blessed, both by the Triforce and hereditary divine powers. The other root is Germanic, with Zelda being a diminutive of Griselda, which originates from the Proto-Germanic words grisaz, meaning grey or terrible, and Hildas, meaning battle. Altogether, Griselda translates to Grey Battle Maid. Though the first few iterations of Zelda were clear-cut damsels in distress, later depictions of the character have indeed been more warrior-like, with the latest incarnation being heavily involved in combating Ganon. This route also explains another naming choice within the series, that of Hilda from 2013's fantastic A Link Between Worlds. Hilda also derives from the Proto-German Hildas, and means simply Battle Maid. A fitting choice then, seeing as Hilda is essentially a parallel reality variant of Zelda, though given her colour palette, the state of her world, and her morally dubious actions, perhaps it would have been more apt for her to have been the Grey Battle Maid. Maybe the series should have been The Legend of Hilda from the start. Fans of Sabrina the Teenage Witch will also recognise this name pairing, as her aunts are named as such. Though Princess Hilda could be an odd reference to these Sisters of Sorcery, it seems more likely that the developers were inspired by the name's shared roots. As a final side note, how fitting is it that Zelda's actress in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Miranda Otto, is also Eowyn from the Lord of the Rings films, perhaps the most famous battle maid in all high fantasy. But back to the games. What about that first bit of the Japanese title? Where did the name Hyrule come from? Information is vague on this front, with Miyamoto merely stating it arose from the team discussing what to call a high fantasy region. In all likelihood, it is just a slightly altered portmanteau of high and rule. Shocking, I know. Notably, the Hyrule Fantasy was initially intended to be the name of the series, perhaps explaining why it was the only English part of the original Japanese title. After all, by the time of the game's development, the NES, had already conquered the USA, so a globally minded approach to games marketing made sense from Nintendo of Japan's perspective. Why Nintendo of America decided to drop the Hyrule Fantasy bit is unknown. In any case, trimming the US name is perhaps why all the later Japanese games switched to also using The Legend of Zelda as the main title. It's been suggested it could also be due to the fame of another Japanese franchise with fantasy in its name. However, the first Final Fantasy didn't arrive in Japan until 11 months after The Legend of Zelda 2 Rinku no Boken, so that seems unlikely. And that's that for how the first Zelda game got its name. There'll be more to come on the etymology of the series' titles and names. After all, this is but one of the legends of which the people speak.